welcome. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. My name is Britta Maddox. I'm the Public Safety Data Systems Fire RMS Administrator for the Anoka County Fire Protection Council, which is a mouthful. And as Steve so nicely mentioned, I am the newly appointed, as of yesterday afternoon, Vice Chair of the GAC and previous at-large member. So this is my second term on the GAC. And yeah, taking over for some of the leadership positions. So I'm excited to be here and share a little bit about kind of what I know and what I do, and hopefully help answer some of your questions. So it's a little bit kind of about where I'm from. So Anoka County is one of the longest standing consortiums in the state, and it has a joint law enforcement council with the 11 law enforcement agencies in Anoka County, and then the Fire Protection Council, which is the 17 fire departments, and then they're kind of combined. There's membership on the law enforcement from the fire and on the fire from the law enforcement, and then with one centralized PSAP. And the consortium was generally designed to enhance data sharing for public safety and to make sure that kind of within Anoka County, we share a lot of functions anyway. We're doing a lot of mutual aid on both sides. Most of our training sessions, especially on the fire side, we have a joint training academy for all the new recruits. So whether they're a Ramsey firefighter, Coon Rapids firefighter, Columbia Heights firefighter, they're going to the Anoka County training. Sorry if you can hear the radio going off in the background. So the hazards of working in public safety is the radio never stops. So I apologize for that. But anyway, the GAC kind of reached out, Corey Richter reached out a couple years ago to me and just said, hey, what we're really missing is a public safety perspective on the GAC. And so she's like, I think you'd be a good person in that role. We'd love to have you. And so that's kind of how I got started in there. And one of the projects at the time for the Geospatial Advisory Council was looking at CGIS guidelines for GIS. So CGIS data, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but criminal justice information systems, and talking about or creating some sort of guideline so that GIS professionals that maybe don't typically have a role in criminal justice information needs get pulled in oftentimes when there's critical incidents or things happening, and they don't always know what their guidelines are, where they can look for data, or where they can look for those guidelines even. So we tried to kind of bring that together and create a document that'll kind of point people in the right direction. And then now, of course, the GAC is pursuing statewide open data sets. And one of the things Anoka County has had success with in the consortium is that sharing of data and kind of that open data, within our county. And so we're trying to help expand what has been successful within Anoka County to statewide data, while also being mindful, especially when it comes to public safety information, of the limitations that we have because of privacy and criminal justice information policies. That's my bio, but I'm gonna skip that because I kind of just gave it to you.
Britta, if I could real quick, you got all the way till 3:30. So I should have mentioned that at the start. So please don't feel pressure like you gotta get done real quick. Okay.
Talk a little slower. I got it.
Yeah, no, we went over on the main part of the meeting, and I should have said something as I transitioned. I apologize.
No, you're fine. So this is just kind of the consortium structure, like I mentioned. So we have that joint law enforcement council with 11 agencies. They share an RMS, and within their RMS, they have incident data and investigative data. Fire Protection Council has kind of the same thing, 17 departments with a shared RMS. Their RMS, however, is a little bit broader. It covers a lot more stuff. So there's not only the incident and investigative data, but there's asset management and training and certifications, payroll, public education. And these are things that often are getting shared, like I mentioned, with the training academy for Anoka County Fire. There's a lot of crossover, people working multiple departments. And then there's also the mutual aid aspect. So we're kind of a tight-knit county and we work very well together. We have MOUs for automatic mutual aid, which is really great. And, you know, we've got a lot of big entities. We have a lot of small entities too. So we kind of fill in the gaps for each other, which is really nice. And having that shared data, we're able to work together on the same parameters so that everything, all the icons, all the data means the same thing across the board. So on the law enforcement side, and we're working right now, I'm developing on the fire side, we have a data standards guide. And so that guide comes together or brings together the system. Since we're all sharing the same RMS, the data should mean the same thing, whether we're whatever department we're at. So that if I go to mutual aid or I go to look for an incident at a department that's not my own, we're speaking the same language. This becomes really important when we start talking about pre-plans on the fire department side, because you lay out a map, you have a pre-plan for a critical incident. And if to me, a little triangle with a lightning bolt through it means there's electrical considerations, but to another department, that means there's biohazard information, we're going to really struggle to understand each other. And when you're in the middle of a critical incident, you don't have time for that. So what we're working on creating, what we've created on the law enforcement side and what we're working on expanding out to cover our fire departments is a data standards guide, so that since we're utilizing the same system, let's all speak the same language, use those same icons so that we can better enhance our response. And then in the middle of all of that, we have central communications, who's dispatching for both police and fire under this lovely public safety data system umbrella that we live in. So people get confused a lot when they ask me who I work for, because my outfit says Coon Rapids Fire Department, and so does my email, but my tasks are countywide. So it gets it's weird because it's a subset of the two councils, but they can't have employees, so it gets weird. But all in all, it's a countywide effort. So kind of what I do is manage the shared RMS for all the fire departments. And right now we're working on transitioning all of our fire departments. Most of them are coming from FDM to a software called First Do. So this has been our kind of impetus to initiate that data standards guide on the fire side. It's been something that they've been wanting to do for a while, and just haven't had, kind of when you're working in status quo and everything's the same as it's always been, it's really hard to tell people, okay, now we want you to do it the same thing differently. But when you're changing to a brand new system, it's a great time to just say, hey, it's a new system. We're going to do things a little bit differently, and we're going to clean it up, make it more efficient. So the goal, and one of my goals, besides helping develop the countywide data standards, is making sure that those data standards make sense across the board, are practical for business practices of the agencies, and increase our efficiency in response and just, after response duties. Because it doesn't just end when the call is done. There's reports that have to be written. There's data that we're going to need down the line from those reports. And sometimes it's hard to think about the value of that data when you're tired and you've just gotten done with an incident, and maybe it's 2 a.m. and you just want to get through all the fields and you don't want to think about other stuff. So trying to make it as efficient as possible to get the most data, so that when we're talking about, trends or looking at data analysis within a department or across departments, we can say, we're meeting those standards that we have, or we're not meeting those standards and why, or we're having a huge increase in calls for lift assists. Why are people falling so much? What is it? The aging population? Do we need to look at other community risk reduction efforts? So these things all kind of play into each other. And part of my job is to help people understand the value of data and why it matters that we're filling in fields beyond just what we're federally required to report. My job also includes training. So I train all the end users on the systems that we have and help answer questions. I'll test upgrades and new releases to the software, and then work as the liaison between the departments and the vendor when there's software issues or getting updates and upgrades, and then working on back-end data analysis and just managing the database overall, monitoring all the functionality of any interfaces that we have as well. And so I'm kind of in a unique position right now where for 6 years, I did the same job in Anoka County, but on the law enforcement side. Took a little 6-month hiatus and then came back to Anoka County on the fire side doing this job. And so I've got that law enforcement experience on top of the fire service experience. That's kind of they do things a lot differently on each side, but also a lot the same. And some of the data needs are the same. And you can get a unique perspective when you've had experience on both ends of the spectrum versus being so focused on, one or the other. You kind of lose some things in there. And this is just a brief slide of the kinds of data that we have in our system. So we have those incident reports, which have state and federal submission requirements. Those also have data that's important for payroll and goes into percentage tracking for firefighters' call percentage. That data also gets used at the state and federal level for things like recalls on vehicles and equipment. And so it's important that the accuracy of our data is there and we're making the updates. I recently took a class at the National Fire Academy on managing fire incident reporting. And it was fascinating to me how much of the information you submit to the federal government is actually used by consumer reporting agencies and things like that to lead to recalls. They actually do go and pull that fire information and look and say, okay, there's been a whole bunch of fires that have started, and the equipment involved in the ignition of this fire was the battery on this Nokia cell phone. And then that leads to the recall of the Nokia cell phone battery. So it's really interesting just how far reaching your little bit of data is. Some of our departments are completely volunteer and they've got 25 people on the department, and they maybe get 10 calls a month, 25 calls a month, and they think, well, my data doesn't matter. Well, it does. And it grows and impact exponentially as you add it into the county totals and you add it into the state totals and you add it into the federal and national totals, and you start, that makes those trends amplify. So I know I'm preaching to the choir on data, importance of data, but I'm passionate about it. I do some of the data analysis for countywide trends. So each department tends to have their own analyst of some sort. Either it's a secretarial type role or the chief role takes on those tasks. But then my position has the access to those countywide trends. So I can look across our county and say, hey, here's stuff we're doing really well. Here's stuff we're not doing very well. And what can we do to change that? Is it we're not reporting it well? Is it a system issue that's not meeting our needs? Is there some software that we need that could help us do something better? Or, do we need to look at a community risk reduction program? And I can kind of feed those question marks that some of the chiefs will have with data to support it. We're also tracking training and certifications for each individual firefighter. And then kind of like I mentioned, the pre-plans and mapping and address verification. So that's another big thing on both sides of the public safety kind of spectrum, is making sure that that address information is correct. So I work a lot with our county GIS, and that feeds into our CAD, which feeds into both of our RMS systems on the law and the fire side, to make sure that our addressing is consistent across the board. The last thing we want to have to do, and we went through this on the law enforcement side when we were transitioning RMS systems, is you would have some people entering data in upper and lower case, and some people entering it in all uppercase. And some people would enter an intersection always with the northwest street or north-south street and then the east-west street, or always alphabetically, or always numbers and then letters. And other people who were doing it different ways. And now that becomes a data nightmare when you're looking for incidents that happened at an intersection because you have a city council member who got hit in that intersection and they think it's a huge problem. And you have to search it, 18 different ways to Sunday to find what you're looking for. So we went through a huge kind of revamp to make sure that we were utilizing the resources that we had and not reinventing the wheel. So now in both systems, the addressing comes to CAD from county GIS and gets pushed out from CAD with that geo-validated GIS address to both RMS systems. So our end users really aren't having to do any data entry when it comes to addressing. And that's increased efficiency. It's less data entry for our end users. And we've increased our accuracy because now we're making sure that the data we have is correct. And if it's not an address, a valid address in our system, there's more checks that it triggers to make sure it is a valid address and we're not sending people somewhere that doesn't exist. We've also got investigations, asset management, activities, and then NEMSIS is the National EMS incident or information systems incident. We only have one entity in Anoka County that has to be NEMSIS compliant for transporting EMS, but it's another facet to consider. So it all comes together into a centralized location. And all of that experience of kind of working with data at a county-wide level and sharing data and understanding what the rules are surrounding safely sharing data between public safety entities fed into my work on the GAC to create this CGIS best practices guide and resources for GIS. And so we were looking to create a resource essentially that would become the authoritative source of criminal justice information and comply with policies. So we didn't need to be that authoritative source. That exists in multiple places. We just needed to bring all of those disparate places together in one spot so that as a GIS professional, when you get called into one of those critical incidents and they need a map and they need it now, you know what data can you pull, what's safe to present publicly, what's safe to present back to your, public safety partners, and then what certification level should you as a GIS professional have to even be able to work with that data? Because we want to make sure that the data is, we're being good stewards of the data. We want it to be accurate, but we also want to make sure that we have the appropriate permissions. If we're going to get called in to do work like that, we need to be certified. And what does that even mean? And a lot of people we discovered didn't know. And so I don't know if these slides can be available somewhere after the fact, but the blue hyperlink does go out to our work group page on the GAC website. So if you're interested, you can go take a look at the work group page. This was our mission statement and our document objectives. I'm not going to read it to you. I think you guys can read it if you want to, but essentially we wanted to bring everything into one place, a centralized location, to have kind of that authoritative guide that says, we're not the authority, but here's where the authority is, and here's where you can go look, a pointer document, if you will. So I do have it here. Oops. Maybe I have it there. Okay, we'll do this differently. This didn't work for me in the last presentation I had either, so I don't know, it's probably me. I just want to pull up, can you see the guide here? Okay, good. I just wanted to pull up the guide and kind of walk through what's inside of it. And this is available on the website as well if you're interested to read further in depth with this or have a copy. But these were all the contributors, people that worked on the committee to help create this guide. And we did consult with the BCA, which is the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and kind of the authoritative source in the state on criminal justice information, to make sure that we weren't overstating or understating anything and we had all the accurate resources. So we have a lovely table of contents. I'm just going to skim introduction. We talk about our target audience, who we're designing this document for. And then as with anything public safety, we have alphabet soup, and there's a ton of acronyms everywhere. So we tried to, where possible, put those in this glossary. I think I've covered all of the ones today and set out the full name, but if there's one I missed, I apologize. I try to be mindful when I'm presenting to actually say out the full name of an acronym, but I miss it sometimes. So those are all in there. And then we talk about the required access standard. So this is where we get into what is that level of training that is necessary for you as a GIS professional to even be able to help in these projects, because it can turn into, you know, a liability nightmare if you're not aware that there are rules surrounding that. So these were things that for me, coming from public safety initially and not GIS, this was common sense to me. And I almost skipped over it in this because I was like, well, of course you have CJIS security awareness. And a couple of our GIS folks on the committee were like, we have what? And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know what this is? And so that was an eye-opening experience for me of like, this is not common knowledge for everyone. This is what you learn on day one in public safety, but not what you learn on day one in GIS. So it was interesting to have that perspective. So this just talks through what is that criminal justice information system security awareness training and test. What does it look like? How often do you have to take it? And actually, I need to update this document because I think it says every 2 years at the bottom, which is what it used to be. But this year it changed and now it's annually. So this document is brand new last year and it's already out of date. So I'll get that fixed. But there's also some additional training that's available. It's not a requirement, but here's some other options. So if you're saying, you know what, I'm getting pulled into a lot of these types of tasks, I would like to know more. Here's some BCA training that you can go and take, and that will help you, not necessarily with the tasks, the GIS related tasks, but it'll help you understand the data better. And then there's some other certifications that may be necessary. And then we started talking about some of the authoritative sources regarding criminal justice information. Where does criminal justice information come from? Is it everything that your police department has? Is it only some things that your police department has? Can you release any data or no data? What are the rules? Where is it coming from? And so this talks about, this is like day 2 of public safety, but the day never of GIS. So we wanted to make sure that this was in there. Where can you find this criminal justice information? What is the data that you need to be worried about? And it's a lot smaller of a scope than you might think. It's actually technically only FBI generated data, which then gets complicated in Minnesota because our state funnels everything from the feds. So if it's state data, it probably is also CJI. So you have to treat it like CJI, but technically state data isn't CJI. It gets really muddy really fast. So we did our best in here to lay it out as clearly as possible. And we just did a summation of each of these documents, and then the full CJIS security policy and the CJDN security policy are all, which is the Criminal Justice Data Network, are the full policy is attached, but the document just kind of lists the gist. And then the statute for criminal justice information generated from your local agency is the most complicated. And we summarize that in here, but the statute can be found online. And then we thought it would be interesting to also list some common tools and sample use cases. So, you know, a lot of the GIS professionals know what tools they use, but there might be other tools out there that are better for certain types of jobs, especially as it relates to public safety specific data. So we talk about what some of those tools are, if there are security concerns with these tools, or if they've already built in masking capabilities that prevent any issues. And then depending on if the data can be public or not within this tool, also adjust whether or not you have any security concerns or not. And then we talk about some specific analytic tools that are for public safety professionals. So CrimeView Analytics and LexisNexis or Accurate are both public safety kind of specific tools that have some level of mapping, but they also have significant criminal justice information built in. And so they would very much be, you know, secure only, making sure if you have access to those things, you've been through the security awareness training and tests. And then we talk some about the GIS data sources. Where can you get GIS data to cross-reference with your public safety information? And we just list all of that here. We talk a little bit about the NG 911 data in here. At the time when we wrote this, we didn't have a link to a website with the existing project in the state of Minnesota. I know that exists now, so that's another thing that we'll probably update in the document. And then the appendices that have, the full policies. So that was kind of the work that the GAC did, or the CJIS committee did. And we created that document, presented it to the GAC, they accepted it, and yeah, so we kind of checked that off the list of priority projects, which was really, really cool. Another priority project, I don't have a slide for it, but that I'm just starting on the GAC is looking at property crime data statewide and looking at mapping that. Right now, the state has a Crime Data Explorer where you can do some analytics with statewide data for crimes, but it's not geospatially linked at all. So you can't do any heat maps or hotspot mapping or anything like that. And right now we're looking at what are the CJIS considerations for being able to get that lat long or ambiguated data to be able to do some level of mapping to kind of see where things are happening. But also there's a huge push for statewide data sharing right now. And the GAC is, I would say, leading the charge on that, or at least kind of dragging people along with them. And there's a lot of benefits to it. So we're looking at, next gen 911 and sharing that type of informational data. And we're looking at, it's beyond that though, the road closures, the detours, the elevation, building layouts. We talk about critical infrastructure, underground utilities mapping. You don't think of that necessarily as public safety information, but it matters because, my fire truck's route to get to your house to put your fire out might be severely impacted if that road is closed. If you live at the end of a cul-de-sac and your cul-de-sac street is closed, that's going to be a huge implication for my response to your house if you have a structure fire. So being able to have that information at our fingertips and shared statewide is huge, especially when you start talking about those bigger incidents. You have a structure fire, you get mutual aid from all sorts of departments. Sitting in Coon Rapids right now, we could get mutual aid requests from Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, and we don't know what the roads are doing over there. We know in Coon Rapids, we typically get stuff from Public Works, but we don't know down there. And so having access to this quickly and easily would be huge. And then we start talking about crime statistics and just that open and transparency that everyone is looking for in public safety nowadays. And it just builds and builds and builds upon itself. So a couple different data sets that are in progress. Parcels and open data, free and open data for Metro GIS. These are all links that you can visit to your heart's content. And then the NG 911 status as of August 30th, which I happened to pull up this map like 2 days ago, and it's already different. So it's been 15 days of September, and I thought I was getting an updated map and I'm still out of date. So these are fast moving projects and people are really, making great strides in that sharing. And I think all people and entities involved are doing a great job of monitoring, and weighing privacy and citizen privacy with the value of that data and making sure that we're doing things thoughtfully. And that's the end of my spiel. So I'll now open the floor. I only went a little bit over. So questions or anything, that's my contact info too. If you are like me and don't like to ask questions in a group format, feel free to email me or give me a call or text. I'm happy to talk more about it or explain anything.
Britta, you've got a number of questions primarily routed at you by
in the
Rick
chat.
over at Ramsey County. And I'll just let him come after you.
Steve, you said you were going to ask it. No, Brett, super exciting. Super exciting. Friend of Anoka County down here in St. Paul, the big city within Ramsey County, almost all of Ramsey County. But that's for another discussion. Super exciting. Down here, I'm seeing and supporting, efforts for RMS and access to this data, both contribution and consumption, by our second team of first responders. That's parks, public works, even libraries. That in St. Paul, we've got supporters that are either quietly alongside or sometimes in front of police and fire. Alternative response, alternative responders to to benefit those that need mental assistance or drug-related stuff that doesn't require a gun, doesn't require a hose, and certainly do not want to tie up our critical EMS response capability. So my question is, has Anoka wrestled with, how do we securely incorporate those other departments that are so crucial in the whole of government public safety?
Yeah, there are lots of discussions in Anoka County on that very thing. How do we do that and make sure that our data is still, secure and siloed where it needs to be and shared where it can be. We have a couple law enforcement partners that have embedded social workers, and I worked with them getting them set up to have access to those law enforcement databases with limited reach. So we were able to get them logins to our law enforcement databases and have that investigative and name information and kind of general gist of incidents and what's occurred at that residence, but without the full reaching capabilities of getting into some of the other stuff that's more protected. And that has worked very well for those departments. Those were also sort of internal employees. They weren't paid for by the city, but they were reimbursed. And so they were like People's Inc. or whatever, Canvas Health employees that were kind of on loan to us. And they were housed within the police department. So that helped. A lot of the data protection comes from the physical security of the device that you're working on. And so they, our social worker at Coon Rapids is allowed to utilize a desktop machine in the police department to access the data. That's not something they can download on their Canvas Health computer that they get, loaned to them for work through them, but they can use a desktop computer and then their login has particular access. Something we're working on actually right now in the fire implementation is the asset management piece of our software has the ability to create work orders, and those work orders get assigned essentially like you have a whiteboard or a pegboard and you stick the piece of paper with the tack on it. It's an electronic version of that. And so we're looking at getting logins for our public works employees who can go in and take a look at that whiteboard and see those work orders and move them to the different statuses on that pegboard, if you will, without then having also access to patient information, which has to be HIPAA compliant. So we're starting to build those bridges in small ways. And I imagine that with the way, AI and just technology in general is going and the huge push for that transparency and that ease of access for cross data referencing, I think we're just starting on a journey that's going to get bigger and bigger.
Well, that's encouraging. It's better than just the, CJIS, HIPAA, PII, done talking answer. So I appreciate that.
And we, I'm not saying we don't hit roadblocks that are like that too. We have some of those, but we do try very hard where we can, and especially when there's a very visible need. Those embedded social workers, it's a very tangible explanation of why they need access to that information. And that helps with any audit that you're going through with the BCA or any other federal entity to when you can identify a tangible need. And same thing with the, apparatus information. We can lock down the system completely, and when they log in, they don't have even the option to try to click on that field. It doesn't even exist. So they go in and it's just their big whiteboard, and that's all they see. And so it's nice. I think some of the software vendors are starting to see that push as well and helping make that an easier transition.
Thank you.
Oh, there's got to be some more questions out there.
Everyone's like me. They don't like talking in a group.
I mean, that was an amazing range of information. And I'm going to be one of the first to admit, much of what you were talking about caught me flat-footed, to be honest with you. So your original comment about what's this stuff we have to learn before we get access to this information? I mean, there you go. Are there any more questions? You're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it. And I am a little vindicated. My first GAC meeting, I'll share that I was so over my head because I don't come from the GIS world. And, LiDAR means something completely different to a cop than it does to you guys. And so I was listening to a LiDAR speed. I'm like, what are they doing with like, they really care so much about people speeding? Like, what is going on? And then I quickly realized that LiDAR is something completely different for you guys. So I've learned a lot, being a part of the GAC and just focusing kind of on that GIS piece. And so it's been fun for me, and hopefully this will be kind of informative for you guys.
So Britta, what we can do here is I'll send out a wrap-up note on the back end of this to remind people where the recording is. I can also publish your information and any links that, for instance, you indicated that you had several links in your presentation that you would like to make sure people had access to. We can do that also.
Okay.
So connect with me, send me what you'd like to have, and I'll insert that in the wrap-up note.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Any more questions? All right, I'll just open the floor, open forum. Is there anything else out there that someone would like to address? A topic you'd like to see in the future? Whatever. Okay. With that, it's a beautiful afternoon. So Britta, thank you so much again for your presentation. Obviously, you had a lot of interest. This is one of our better attended meetings in a long time. So thank you for doing that. And with that, everybody have a great rest of your week and a wonderful weekend. It's supposed to be nice. So take care.